Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Navigating the Muskoka Planning and Development Process, with our guests from the municipal planning and building sectors. We're going to start in a few minutes just to give everybody a chance to get online. While you are waiting, please take our poll. We have just a few questions just to get a sense of who is on the line tonight, where you are from, and understanding your motivation for attending this evening. Just scroll down to see all the questions and press submit when you're done. And there'll be a second poll at the end of the webinar, just 3 short questions to get your feedback on what you saw tonight and what you might like to see in the future. Thank you. So first glitch of the night, seems our poll is not working. We're going to be trying to get that going. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Navigating the Muskoka Planning Process. We have about 62 folks signed on. We had a registration number of over 180, so we're going to wait just a few more minutes to get started. We had a poll planned, and I think we're trying to get that going, but it may not happen. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Navigating the Muskoka Planning and Development Process. I think we're going to get started. We may have many people still trying to sign in, but in the interest of time, I think we'll get going. My name's Debbie Korolnek. and I'll be your moderator tonight. I'm a director with Muskoka Lakes Association and a member of our Government and Land Use Committee. I'm a third generation Muskoka cottager on Lake Muskoka, and there are 2 more generations after me. So the purpose of our webinar tonight is we have 4 main objectives. One is we want to provide you with some general information about the planning process, how it works, what the roles and responsibilities are of the various players, and why it's important. If you are at second, we want to say that give you some information for those of you that are making a planning application. How do you go about doing that? And what are the keys to ensuring that you get the required approvals in a reasonable amount of time? If you're contemplating a major renovation or building project, how do you successfully get through that process and have the right professionals on your team so that there are no unpleasant surprises or cost escalations or delays? And finally, if you are participating in the planning process as a neighbor or an interested party, how to do that effectively. So those are our objectives for tonight. Here's what's happening. First, we're going to have a presentation running about 20 or 30 minutes on the planning and development process in Ontario, and more specifically in Muskoka, to explain the process and how it works. Next, I will be posing questions to our panelists intended to answer the most common questions people have and highlight practices and characteristics of successful projects. There will also be an opportunity for you to ask questions, and you need to do that by using the chat, not by raising your hand. So on the bottom of your toolbar, there is a Q&A. And so you need to pose your questions through that Q&A icon. Few housekeeping rules for tonight. First, all of our attendees are muted. You will not be able to speak tonight or be on video. Use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to ask our panelists a question this evening, please type it in the box and press enter to have it posted. You can enter questions at any time through the webinar. Many may be answered as we go along, so we won't be trying to answer all of the questions in the chat. There should be a function that you can vote a question up. So if somebody else has posted a question and you like that question and you want it to be answered, you can vote that question up. If we can't get to all the questions tonight, we'll endeavor to get answers for you either and post them on the website or contact you personally somehow. And to our panelists, a reminder to use your mute button when you're not speaking. And one final thing, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our MLA website for others who weren't able to attend tonight to view the entire thing from start to finish. First, I'd like to introduce the panel. I wonder if panelists, you could turn on your cameras and just give a wave when I introduce you. First of all, we have Stephen Fauner. Stephen will kick things off with a presentation on the planning and development process. Stephen is the sole proprietor of Northern Vision Planning Limited, a respected planning consultant in the Muskoka area. Stephen moved to Bracebridge 35 years ago to fill the position of Director of Planning at the Township of Muskoka Lakes. During his tenure at TML, he initiated a number of new policy initiatives, including shoreline buffers, dark sky lighting, and tree preservation site alteration bylaws, which have evolved over time under the current staff. Stephen sees the importance of carefully managed development in cottage country to maintain its character and environmental sustainability. And he's a director for the Muskoka Conservancy and sees the need for acquisition and education in protecting the natural resources of Muskoka for future generations. David Pink. David, I wonder if you could turn your camera on. Hi, David. He's the Director of Development Services and Environmental Sustainability for the Township of Muskoka Lakes. He's a registered professional planner. David graduated with a BSc from the University of Western Ontario and obtained a Master's of Environmental Science from Memorial University. David joined the Township of Muskoka Lakes in 2004 as a planner, then a senior planner, and then Director of Planning. In his current role as Director of Development Services and Environmental Sustainability, he has overall responsibility for planning, building, bylaw enforcement, and economic development. Bryce Sharp. Bryce, can you turn your camera on? Is the Manager of Planning for the Township of Muskoka Lakes. Bryce holds a BSc in Environmental and Resource Science from Trent University and an MSc from the University of Guelph. He's a member of the Canadian Institute of Planning and the Ontario Professional Planners Institute and is a registered professional planner. Bryce has held land use planning positions with Parks Canada, the Yukon Environmental and Socioeconomic Assessment Board, and the Niagara Escarpment Commission. Taylor Elgie is the Director of Planning for Seguin Township. Taylor is a municipal planner with over 15 years of experience in land use planning across various government tiers. Taylor holds the MICP and RPP designations. In his current role as Director of Planning, Taylor plays a role in land use and strategic planning and team leadership. Prior to this, he held roles in the Development and Protective Services Department of the town of Parry Sound. With a strong commitment to delivering exceptional public service and fostering positive stakeholder relations, Taylor has a proven track record in municipal planning and community development. And finally, last but not least, Hugh Smith was introduced to Muskoka in 1972 when his family purchased a cottage here. Hugh was involved in the investment banking business until 1990, where he held various roles. After this time, he moved to Muskoka and started Forest Hill Fine Homes and Husky Steel Dock and Barging with his offices in Port Carling. Over the last 34 years, Hugh has completed hundreds of successful projects, including custom cottages and boathouses, steel docks, landscaping, demolition, and more. He prides himself for being a responsible builder with a great respect for the lakes and its beautiful shoreline, and MLA has worked before with Hugh on a number of initiatives. Hugh owned a cottage on Sugarloaf Island until 2023. He made a number of submissions to Township Council about the need to strengthen the tree cutting bylaws and enforcement following the clearing there by another property owner on Sugarloaf Island. So that's our panel for this evening. We'd also like to welcome, I believe Rob Bosenworth is here as an attendee tonight from the Township of Muskoka Lakes, the Chair of Planning Committee. Thank you very much for attending, Rob. And many thanks to our panel members who are donating their time and expertise to this effort tonight. And now I'd like to turn things over to Stephen Fauner to kick it off. Stephen?
Yeah, thank you very much, Debbie. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I appreciate the accolades there. I don't think in my bio I put in respected, but somebody obviously did. So I guess there's somebody out there who likes me. So that's great. I'm just going to queue up my presentation. So it'll just take a moment here. Okay, so I do have a number of slides to go through, so hopefully I can get through it all. So anyways, just start out with a nice picture of actually a lake that doesn't have development on it. This lake is actually on the border between Bracebridge, the town of Bracebridge in Muskoka, and Haliburton, actually. So a lot of it's crown land. So anyways, just a nice beginning to the topic, and I'll try and keep it as interesting as I can. Certain things do get a little bit dry, but I'm certainly hopeful that you'll gain something from the presentation. So in terms of history of planning in Ontario and, and why plan. And anyways, it was started out largely as an urban issue. There was a need for order. There was a need for services. Environmental quality was certainly deteriorating in urban areas. So that's why there was a need for planning. And here we have a picture of someone who obviously has a bit of a transportation problem and certainly a problem with roads at the time. So this is a case where the horse is actually pulling the car. Obviously, it's kind of like a Tesla having a generator in the back just in case things don't go the way they should with the batteries. In terms of history, first Ontario Planning Act was enacted in 1946, and this introduced the notion of official plans and implementing zoning bylaws, and also established a system of amendments and public meetings. The original philosophy at the time was the grassroots, that things came from the bottom up, came from the community, and any changes that didn't conform with the plan or bylaw at the time, then it was decided at the public meeting where neighbors were notified and they knew what was going on particular properties. Now we have, over the years, it's actually changed to more of a top-down approach, and we have a provincial policy statement which looks down on the other documents, which are official plan documents and zoning bylaws, etc., at district level or upper tier level governments and lower tier governments. I wanted to point out a bit of a bugaboo that I have with planning in cottage country is there's really a lack of education as relating to cottage country. You won't see any planning course in any curriculum at any university in this country, at least when I last checked. And there still hasn't been any to my knowledge. And in Muskoka, we actually started, the area official plans were actually secondary plans of the district official plan. And it wasn't until legislation around 1990 that created two-tier planning in Muskoka. Now, I do know that Taylor LG is here from Seguin, so this really doesn't entirely apply. Seguin is subject to a single-tier planning system. I would say that, including Seguin Township, that Muskoka is a leader in planning policy for cottage country. I've been involved in some planning matters in Eastern Ontario, and I can certainly tell you that they're behind in terms of policy development compared to what we have in Muskoka. And even though there may be frustrations from time to time with policy in Muskoka, maybe it doesn't encompass that particular development that your neighbor's doing, it is quite comprehensive in comparison to other areas of the province. I'm not going to go through the Planning Act. I'm just going to suggest there is a citizen's guide that you can look to, and that's something that can be obtained from the website, from the provincial website. The Planning Act is where we get authority to do things in terms of, again, official plans, zoning bylaws, site plans, etc. Provincial policy statement, as I mentioned, is really a part of the top-down approach. Official plans must be consistent with the PPS. This is stronger language than what was there before. You used to only have to have regard for the PPS, so you could open it up, read it, and then put it aside and say you had regard for it. There are a number of implementation guidelines were produced for this, one of them being the Natural Heritage Reference Manual. And this was for an old version of the provincial policy statement, but it's actually still in effect now. One of the important things to note with the PPS, like when the PPS was developed, I really don't think they had development on lakes in mind. It was more urban related, certainly GTA oriented. But importantly, in the implementation section is that the official plan is noted to be the best tool for implementation. So you can have a local official plan that basically is tailored to the issues of that area. And that is something that's recognized within the PPS. You have to look at all policies in the PPS, just like you have to in any other planning document. And what's proposed there or is there are minimum standards only. It certainly has added strength to the environmental requirements and policies in this area, and there have been 5-year reviews that have been done. So in terms of official plans, I just threw this in there because it's a nice picture and obviously quite relevant because it's the front page of the Township of Muskoka Lakes official plan. So official plans, they basically try to guide the municipalities to how it's to develop. It's done through various statements, policy maps. It's tended to be general in nature and provide some flexibility. This is an upper tier official plan example, again, that being of the district municipality of Muskoka. And when I say here much of the province is in a two-tier planning system, it's really much of the population of the province, because this is a Southern Ontario matter for the most part. We happen to be one of the further north areas that has two-tier planning system. And this two-tier system does vary depending on the area. Certain areas in cottage country don't have a second tier, and Prairie Sound District does not have a second tier of or an upper tier of planning. So Seguin Township, for example, I would consider it a single tier. Same with the city of Kawartha Lakes. It's not impacted by the county of Peterborough official plan, for example. So the upper tier is a strategic document, and the lower tier has to conform with that. Sometimes there is a challenging coordinating policy to address certain issues. And there is certainly some duplication in the plans. There's no doubt about that. But again, the upper tier has to be consistent with the PPS, and the lower tier plans must conform to the upper tier. But they do provide more detailed policy. So this is actually, I just want to quickly go through this. I'm not going to point out every one, but just to show you the breadth of what's considered in an official plan. This is, I think, that's out of the Township of Muskoka Lakes official plan. So, and here's where you get into natural heritage and water resources. There's certainly quite a number of things there. I want to draw your attention to section D 1.5, which is a matter called net gain. I'm maybe going to mention a little bit more about that. Something that's relatively new in official plans, and I think it's an excellent initiative. You get down to the bottom where it talks about waterfront area. And we get on to development policies for the waterfront area itself, and there's quite a number of policies there. And at the bottom, we get into recreational carrying capacity and lake plans. This only takes us to page 90. This whole document is actually roughly 295 pages long. It's a little bit less than that, but so it's a significant document and quite lengthy. Now, it is a recent review, and it is a new updated official plan, so it is very comprehensive. And this is just an example of what policies would read, regarding natural heritage features and areas. Some of them are fairly simple statements. These ones really only tell you where the natural heritage features are, for the most part, and that there's appendices or maps that are attached to them. And I didn't get into providing any more detail because I could spend all day going through policies, but this is just an example here of starting into the policies on wetlands, for example. So the lower tier official plans attempt to balance, population and economic growth with environmental sustainability. I think as the old beer commercial says, it's all about balance, and official plans try and do the same, even though I sort of hate to compare it to a beer commercial, but anyways, maybe there are times reading it might be wise to have a good beer, I don't know. So some official plans, as I noted, are requiring net gain in environmental attributes of a property when considering a Planning Act application. So if, for example, a property does not have much in the way of a shoreline vegetative buffer, then a policy regarding net gain would suggest that when you go through an application, you should be trying to improve that attribute. Long-term site monitoring is also now starting to be required very briefly in official plans. So here's an example of a map. We used to kind of joke when we were in school that geographers or planners that we used to love colored maps, and we used to have coloring 101 at university, but that's not really entirely true. But I must admit, I think as planners, we do like to have these pretty colored maps. So in this case, in the case of town of Gravenhurst, we have the waterfront area shown as the sort of brownish area, reddish brown. You've got the flesh-colored area is the rural area. Green is open space. Dark green is going to be natural heritage areas. So this again is a normal schedule you'd find attached to an official plan. And this is another schedule, the same official plan that actually speaks more to the environment. Deer wintering areas are fairly prominent. They're sort of in that reddish color. There are wetlands in green, provincially significant wetlands, and this particular map actually also shows aggregate mineral resources. Sometimes that's on a totally separate schedule. So there's text that you look at with the official plan, and there's also maps that relate to the text. Background reports, unfortunately, sometimes are a little bit lacking, but they can be an important matter to review. Implementations policies are also something that is overlooked at times, but again is very important. There's a trend to have more detailed policies, and unfortunately, it's getting to be a little bit more like a zoning bylaw, and that's just been the natural progression with them. Just wanted to relate to Muskoka. I know there's some people say that, well, we should have one official plan for all of Muskoka. The concern is that I think you'd go to the lowest common denominator, in other words, the least comprehensive policies. The policies that, generally speaking, in the towns, in my opinion, are maybe not quite as comprehensive regarding waterfront development as they are with the townships. And so I'm not sure that it would work that well to try and bring everyone into one official plan. I don't think we'd have the comprehensive nature that we do now with the individual municipalities. And those official plans have to be updated every 5 years. In terms of zoning bylaws, the parent zoning bylaw is known as the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and it's governed by a certain section in the Planning Act. And it largely regulates the use of land, buildings, building density and location, as well as building height. I just threw this in here, actually, I think maybe just because it's a nice picture. It happens to be my street in Bracebridge in the fall. Just wanted to point out that I know that many people of interest, I think in this webinar, are probably waterfront landowners or interested in waterfront. But there are, 3 significant urban areas within Muskoka that also must be considered: Huntsville, Bracebridge, and Gravenhurst. And there's a number of other urban centers that are serviced and so forth. So it's not entirely about the waterfront. The urban areas are part of the fabric as well. So that also has to be taken into account in official plan. Zoning bylaws, and also have to take into account in zoning bylaws too. Bylaws emanate from the official plans, and they are used to implement the official plans, and they turn the policies into enforceable numbers. Zoning bylaws don't always apply that well to cottage country, particularly given the properties that are involved. There's a great variety of properties. And the best bylaw that I can think of would be a bylaw that have that would have separate provisions for each property. However, in the case of Muskoka Lakes alone, you'd have a bylaw that was literally 15,000 pages long, or could be even more than that, if it applied, one provision applied to each property. So there are various zones that apply throughout the municipality, and these are most commonly sorted by use: commercial, industrial, residential. Those are the most common ones. There's other more specialized ones like institutional, open space, environmental protection as well. Some are sorted by area. Muskoka Lakes is one that you would first go to the waterfront section to see the provisions there. You would go to the community section and look at provisions there, and you go to the rural section. So, but usually they're done by use. So this is just the cover page. One little point to note here: if anyone is deciding to research and look up a comprehensive zoning bylaw, it's best that you make sure you go to the website and get the most recent one. So in the case of Muskoka Lakes Township, this was consolidated February 2023, but there are definitely some older versions around. So you just have to be careful that you're using the most recent. So this is an example of waterfront residential zoning, and you can see you go across the top, if you will, and it gives you the zone that you may be in, and then down the left-hand side, you'd see all the provisions that apply regarding frontage area, lot coverage, etc., setbacks. And so this is fairly common that you get tables, and the ones now, I get a little bit frustrated. There still are some old bylaws out there that are all written out, and it's very difficult to follow. So these tables are excellent, especially given the fact that there's multiple zones. The waterfront residential zones here, there's 8 different zones. So there's quite a number. And this isn't counting, the rural zones or urban center zones or community zones. So the table format works well. So the standards do vary from place to place. A lot coverage is pretty common to limit density. Both land-based structures and water-based structures are subject to these provisions. It used to be thought that water-based structures were strictly provincial jurisdiction, but that's not the case, and there's actually been some recent court cases that actually support that. There's also numerous definitions. There's also general provisions. You have to remember to read the entire bylaw, and that's why it's sometimes helpful, depending on the situation, to retain a planner who's familiar with the documents, because they can be a little bit unwieldy at times. And I've had clients that have told me that, oh, Steve, I know I can get 5 lots off my property, and they've only read one little section of the bylaw. They haven't read the fact that they have to have full services, and they don't, and so they're subject to other provisions in the bylaw that says you can only have 1 or 2 lots. And in fact, I ran into that very recently in Bracebridge. So, as with the official plan, there are maps and schedules. One of the things I would like to point out too is, unfortunately, there's a lack of background studies when doing a zoning bylaw, because they do get expensive to produce, but they would be very helpful to know what the intent of some of the zones are. And you're left, and with staff unfortunately changing over at municipalities, you're left to various interpretations of certain parts of zoning bylaw. So this is an example here of zoning bylaw schedule. This is just in the Port Carling area. And the yellow in this case happens to be residential, and the red being commercial. Purple is would be industrial, and then we have various shades of green, which would be open space or environmental protection. As we go to the southeast of Port Carling and sort of zoom in a little bit, and I will mention that this mapping is available on Muskoka GeoHub. And that is a web, you can get that, it's a separate website. It's actually governed by the District of Muskoka, and it's an excellent tool. This is only one of many tools that are on it, is the zoning. So we see in this area, most of it is gray, so it's waterfront residential. We have one tourist commercial property, which happens to be a client of mine there, actually the Foreman Road sign, that stuff's cottages. And as we zoom in farther to Horseshoe Island, for example, you will see the zoning, the various types of zones that are there. So these are different waterfront residential zones. The 3 signifies it's a regular island zone. A 5 is either narrow water bodies or steep slopes. And the -7 is the presence of deer habitat on the property, so it's subject to site plan control. The one that is hatched there's been a special exemption provided on that property, and given its number, 2048, it's a fairly recent. And I couldn't tell you what that exemption is for, but you can actually get that information off of Muskoka GeoHub. So in terms of the amendment process, okay, I like to think I've given a little bit of background just on what official plans are and zoning bylaws, but now you get into amending the zoning bylaws. And the process in Ontario is a permissive one, and municipalities cannot refuse to receive an application. I know there are many people out there wonder how certain applications get to public meetings, but the municipality cannot refuse them. They cannot support them. They can always turn them down, and staff can tell them they won't support them, but they can't refuse to receive an application. And there's notice to neighbors. There's a public meeting held, and the council has various powers, in terms of deferring, approving, or denying applications. And then is the potential for appeal. I'm not going to go through this. I'm just going to point out that there is a process. There's certain timing under the Planning Act that municipalities have to adhere to. And that's why sometimes you'll have public meetings in the wintertime that people don't like. And typically what have found happen is you have an environmental report completed through the summer, you receive it in the fall, you then prepare, my job is to prepare the application, prepare a planning justification report. You have it into the municipality in October, and by the time you wait for a public meeting, voila, you're in the middle of winter. And the municipality is bound by certain timing that they have to circulate things. So Certainly, I guess I can speak for my applications. There's not the intent to have it in the winter, but it's not unusual just because of timing. So zoning bylaws must conform to the intent and purpose of the official plan, and more environmental reports are becoming a normal item to accompany such applications just because we're dealing with more difficult properties. And the way that the bylaws are administered does change from one municipality to another. I'll use the example of a front yard setback of 100 feet, and I know one municipality in Muskoka that uses that. But there's so much existing development within the 100 feet that in some respect, it's almost a little bit meaningless. You have to make the application, but they're approved pretty easily, as long as you have some decent substantiation and some decent shoreline vegetation. Some municipalities are really strict on the size of sleeping cabin or number of habitable buildings on a lot, and Muskoka Lakes is one of those. And whereas in other municipalities, you would get approval for those types of things a little more easily. So it varies from one municipality to another as to their experience and how they administer their bylaw. And I would also say too that decisions on applications have sort of moved away from being based on special circumstances. It used to be, it had to be something special on the property. Maybe it's a rock outcropping or something, but it's sort of moved more towards addressing impacts. And of course, you can do that by providing buffers and that type of thing, maybe increasing setbacks from the side yard, but still be close to a rear yard. So there are times like lot coverage is one that's difficult to address because some people could argue, what's the special circumstance? Why do you have to go beyond lot coverage? You've already got, let's say, 3,000 square feet, but now you want a garage or some other form of building on the property that's taking you over. So you could sort of say, what's the special circumstances? But really, if you look at it, what is the impact? If that building is put on the property in that location, and that has really become the more major determinant is really the impact. In terms of implementation tools, so there are other tools, site plan agreements, subdivision consent agreements, and holding zones. There's a whole slew of them, and again, they emanate from the Planning Act. And I won't go through them except a little bit on site plan agreements. Site plan control is governed by a certain section of the Planning Act, and you have to have policies in the OP. So there are certain matters that are governed by site plans. You cannot deal with use of the property or density. But you can look at other things, parking, landscaping, shoreline vegetative buffers are a good thing to look at for waterfront properties. It is the agreement itself. There is an agreement that is registered on title, and it is considered applicable law under the Building Code Act. And what that means is that the chief building official cannot issue a building permit until the site plan agreement has been fully enacted. And depending on the municipality, whether it is to be registered on title or not. And for site plans to implement those site plans and make sure things are constructed as proposed, the municipality can take security. And there is an agreement, and again, not going through it, but there is a formal agreement that is registered on title. This is an example from the Township of Muskoka. So I'm just going to use an example that I was involved in. This is actually the Chestnut Park office in the downtown Port Carling that I received site plan approval for. And again, just to show you some pretty lines and lots of colors on the drawing. This is a contour plan that was used as background to the site plan application with the existing buildings shown in the orange or brown color there. And the proposed one is in the gray outline. When you strip away all the contours, this is the actual site plan that you see with the parking shown. There were two additional reports that were, as well as a planning justification report, there were two additional reports. There was a landscaping plan report, and there was a stormwater management plan report as well that accompanied the application. And it did get approved, and it also was accompanied by architectural drawings, which here is the architectural rendering that was provided at the time. And I think the building does look very similar to this, with the timber frame entrances and the stone pillars there, if you will. And I think it's a very attractive building and a great addition to Fort Carling. You just don't want to be the person who's behind this property and maybe had a few drinks or something one night and come walking down. It's a long ways down to the parking lot, so you might be hurting a bit in the morning. There are two other bylaws I just want to point out, and I'll have to go through this quickly. I see my time is running out here. The tree preservation bylaw, I'll just point out, it's under the Municipal Act, and this comes into play many times. There's also I'll call it a concurrent site alteration bylaw as well, passed under the Municipal Act. So the municipality does have quite reasonable tools to enforce these types of things within the areas that are provided in that bylaw. In terms of councils and committees, this varies greatly from municipality to municipality as to how it operates. Some place you go directly to council, some it's committees to council, and the way they operate can be quite different. And I'll just leave it at that. And public meetings are held for various things. I've just said here that decisions are not necessarily made that same day, again, depending on the setup. There is a procedure that is followed. It's could be under procedural bylaw, for example, depending on how the municipalities address that. Procedures are not dictated by the Planning Act. So I will point out a few things. Normally, you're only allowed to speak out once, and there is a time limit. You're not necessarily permitted to respond, and it's best to be clear and concise and keep things simple but to the point. You may wish to retain a consulting planner, and which you can relate to the official plan policies of that particular application. And I'm coming from the point of view that somebody might have concerns about the application. And as I mentioned before, committee and council can do a number of things regarding the application. The Ontario Land Tribunal is the appeal body if you're not happy with council's decision. Third-party appeals, however, have been eliminated for consents and minor variances. This is part of a provincial initiative to speed up the planning process, and depending on which side of the fence you're on as to whether you happen to like that or not. I always encourage that have negotiations with neighbors at the local level, and the Ontario Land Tribunal tends to rule in favor of applicants. I'm going to use an example proposal that I have here just to get an idea a little bit about what's involved. And I've tried to pick one that's fairly straightforward, but they all have their nuances. So in this case, it's on Lake Joseph, up near Little Lake Joe. And it's a proposed two-story boathouse on a lot that has less than 300 feet of frontage. And you need to have 300 feet of frontage to have a two-story boathouse. So you kind of wonder, well, how does this person get approval? Secondly, they also want to convert an existing sleeping cabin to storage. So there's already a sleeping cabin on land, and you're only allowed one per lot. So when you try to put one in the boathouse, then you have to do something with the sleeping cabin on land. So the proposal, one of the main things that was substantiated this was the fact that the actual shoreline is considerably more than the straight line frontage in this case. This is the property itself. This is a copy of the building location survey, which is very wise to do. I know it does cost money, but it's an excellent investment in your property. Do this prior to doing any Planning Act application, and it makes it much more clear. So we have in this particular case, we have a cottage located here. This is the sleeping cabin existing, and we do have a garage. And the main thing is this boathouse over here. Okay, and that's to be a two-story boathouse. Currently, it's known as a 1.5-story boathouse, and then has storage above. And that, again, was part of the positive points related to this particular application. So this is a site plan that was generated from the building location survey. And again, it shows the more detail about the proposed boathouse. Then we zero in or focus in on that. And you get the more dimensions and so forth and the details about that particular boathouse. And this was to add another slip to what was there, as well as a boat port on that. And this was to result in a building like this, which I think is a rather attractive boathouse. It's not just a box. Not a flat roof boathouse, but has some character to it that lends itself to old Muskoka. Probably a cedar shake siding. So this is the southwest elevation. Then we have the northwest elevation, which is, this is where most of the boat traffic will see this. Now, this is a little bit more boxier, but a couple of things is at the upper floor, that is a shed roof, so a shed dormer, and that's more commonplace in Muskoka. And the other thing to note is that it's a boat port and not another slip for the boathouse, so it actually has less visual impact than if it was, again, part of the boathouse itself. So again, all part of the arguments, and that did get approved. Now, if you're submitting an objection, it's best to submit a letter and follow up with a presentation. The planning process is predicated on full disclosure. If you think you're going to ambush somebody at a public meeting, it's not always wise. It can backfire on you, and you may not be listened to at all. So your letter should be clear and concise and needs to obviously indicate where your property is. And I know that sounds basic, but there are lots of times where that doesn't happen. And you find out the objector is actually 2 kilometers away and not even close to this property, and happens to be a friend of somebody if it's a letter in support. So it's well advised to have a planner retained because the planner certainly knows the documents and the municipality knows you're serious about an objection. But you can also add your own personal flavor. It doesn't leave you totally out of the picture. You can certainly provide your own letter and make your own presentation. Planner does allow you to keep yourself at arm's length from any proposal, which I think some people see that as an advantage. And but don't be afraid to seek improvements to a proposal that looks like it's going to be imminent. I had one recently in Seguin Township where we made some gains, not as much as we wanted to, but it was helpful to speak with the neighbors. So in conclusion, and I've taken up a lot of time, and I hope that everyone's still with me. Planning itself is a complicated set of processes. I think overall the system works well, but you always look to improve that. There are always enforcement and follow-up challenges, but it's best to make your views known to the municipality and support those organizations that put forward those opinions, cottage associations, for example. So that's the extent of my presentation, and I hope that hopefully everyone's still with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I think my key takeaway from that presentation was don't try this alone. It is a very complicated process, and we're glad to have folks like you to help us through it. Just to remind folks, if you want to ask your own question, can you click on the Q&A icon? It's at the bottom of your screen. If you mouse over the bottom of your screen, click on that. Go to the open questions, and you can direct your question to either everyone or just the panelist or a specific panelist. I can't guarantee that all questions will be answered at this point, but we will follow up with you afterwards. Also, we do have a short poll. We would appreciate you, while we're getting to the next phase of this presentation, to fill out the poll. That poll will be running in the background while we go ahead and with our panel discussion. So the way this is going to work from here is we have a number of questions for the panelists. They'll be in groups of questions. The first group will be for the municipal planners, the municipal planning staff that have joined us. The second group of questions will be for Stephen Flauner as a professional planner that you may hire to help you through your project. And the third set of questions will be for Hugh Smith as he's the end of the designer and builder aspect of your project. So I'm going to start with questions for the municipal planners while you are doing that poll. And maybe we'll start with David Pink as the head of planning in Township Muskoka Lakes. David, you've seen a lot of applications. What are the most common reasons for delays in obtaining the required planning approvals, and how can people avoid those delays?
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Steve, for that thorough presentation, and good evening, everyone watching. I would say there's really two main key reasons for delays in your planning application, and the first one is really not pre-consulting with staff. You actually have to pre-consult now. We have a mandatory pre-consultation bylaw for certain planning applications, site plans and zoning, but we're unable to for minor variances. And what the pre-consultation process will do, you'll sit down and meet with planning staff who are familiar with the policies, familiar with the bylaws, and go over what's needed to submit a complete application. So any types of drawings and information on the drawings, any type of technical studies, and provide their advice and input, their opinion on the application, their initial opinion on an application for you. And that can be really helpful as opposed to just submitting it blindly, because inevitably what happens when people attempt to do so, there's lengthy delays as staff will get back to applicants and advise them of what's missing. There's a lot of back and forth. A lot of the studies that need to be completed are seasonal in nature, and it can really delay things if you don't have those prepared and are aware ahead of time. The second, and maybe more important, cause for delay is not engaging with your neighbors and the surrounding community. Certainly not obligated to, but staff always highly recommend that you reach out to your neighbors. In my experience, many times neighbors will not be supportive or even object just because they weren't consulted and they feel they really should have been. And it's just an opportunity for them to learn and understand about your development plans, maybe provide you some thoughts, things you maybe haven't thought about, and ways to really massage or refine your development to address any concerns they have. And that will just make the application process so much smoother. When you get in front of a council or committee and you meet your neighbors that way, raise a lot of objections, inevitably council will take a cautious approach. Staff will have to review all the concerns that were raised and address those, and it usually results in a deferral of any decisions and delays. And you can avoid that by reaching out to your neighbors beforehand.
Thanks, David. That's really good advice. This next question I'm going to direct to Bryce. How do I know what types of approvals I may need for my project? And we have a question from the floor that's kind of related. If I don't think I need a zoning bylaw amendment, do I need to hire a planner in order to make sure the application goes smoothly?
Thank you, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak this evening, and thanks for everyone for taking time out of your busy lives to attend this evening's webinar. Debbie, these are great questions, and the best advice that I could give is to work with an Ontario land surveyor to establish the baseline conditions of your property. And why this is important is a building location survey will establish with certainty the size of your property, its lot frontage, and where existing buildings and structures are located relative to the lot boundaries and the shoreline of your property. The next step is really to confirm the zoning of your property, and this can be confirmed using an online tool known as Muskoka GeoHub. Mr. Fauner had mentioned it, which is a convenient tool that's available online to the public. The next step is to review the township's comprehensive zoning bylaw, including the specific provisions that would relate to the zoning of your property. These provisions, as we know, dictate important rules like minimum side yard setbacks, minimum front yard setbacks, lot coverage, maximum height, and so on and so forth. A good option is to work with local professionals to undertake a zoning analysis and to speak with township staff where they feel that it is necessary to plan a compliant development proposal that complies with all of the applicable zoning bylaw provisions. Zoning relief is required. It's recommended that a meeting be held with township staff, as Mr. Pink had noted, to gain their insight prior to submitting a planning application for relief from zoning requirements. And finally, I think this speaks to sort of your second question, Debbie. Landowners will often choose to hire a local planning consultant to oversee and manage their application from start to finish. But there's nowhere in the Planning Act that that requires that, but there are certain benefits to it. It's ultimately up to the applicant or the landowner to decide what their comfort level is.
Thanks, Bryce. And we'll get to the hiring a planner later when we talk to Stephen. Taylor, I'd like to direct this next question to you. Maybe gets into some of the pitfalls. Who is ultimately responsible for obtaining the proper approvals? Is it the landowner? Is it the planning consultant? And permits? And what are the consequences if I fail to get the proper approvals?
Great question. So ultimately, it is the landowner's responsibility to obtain proper approvals. Typically, what you'll see is they'll sign the documentation authorizing their representative to do work on their behalf. So if it's a building permit, that could be a contractor, but the property owner does need to authorize that. They're necessary to ensure zoning requirements, fire and structural safety, and other building standards are all met, including health and safety reasons to ensure the building is safe. And it's a good idea, I would say, to talk to a professional designer or planner if it's a planning issue in advance. Quite often they know the rules, and they can get it started off on the right track. Can avoid any unnecessary back and forth or delays, or they might just know small modifications that might be able to avoid a zoning bylaw amendment or minor variance just by doing a very slight adjustment. If people don't follow the rules and they build without permit, there can be convictions under the Planning Act or Ontario Building Code Act or other municipal bylaws as applicable. The fines can be quite large, or the Building Code Act could require that it be torn down, but we try to avoid that.
Thanks, Taylor. Speaking of building permits, David, when is a building permit required? If I'm just replacing something, I may not need one. When do you need one?
Yeah, I'll just go over a list here. It might be easier. I'll go a bit slow so everyone can jot these down if you're interested in this one. So any building, deck, dock, or roof over 108 square feet, any addition where the building that's being added onto is over 108 square feet, any size building where plumbing is involved will need a permit. Tents over 646 square feet, or an aggregate of tents over that size. Any improvements to structural, plumbing, heating, or sewage disposal systems. Removal and replacement of a deck or stair guards and railing. And that's actually the last one, but I would point out the building code recently changed quite recently, and you are now permitted to construct one standalone freestanding shed used solely for storage purposes up to 161 square feet without a building permit. The one thing I would note that I think is very important, it's a common misconception. Regardless of whether you need a building permit or not, you always have to comply with the zoning bylaw. So many people think it's just small or what have you, I don't need a permit, I can just do whatever I want. It's technically not the case. There's still setbacks and things to adhere to in the zoning bylaw.
Thanks, David. And if people have questions, I'm assuming it would be advisable for them to drop into the township offices or give somebody there a call to ask those questions, just to make sure that they know what they have to do.
Definitely. I think if ever in doubt, or even if you're not, certainly reach out to our building team at the township or wherever you're located, and they should be able to advise you. If you describe your proposal, they'll be quite easily be able to tell you whether a permit is necessary or not, and then guide you to the forms and what will be needed.
That's great. Thanks very much. I'm going to move now to the cloud permit system. Recently, Township of Muskoka Lakes introduced the cloud permit system. Bryce, can you tell us a little bit about that, how it works, and what are the advantages and how people can find out more about that?
Sure, thank you, Debbie. The township is very excited to offer Cloud Permit as an online platform for applicants to submit planning applications electronically. This is new to the township, and through Cloud Permit, applicants can access the platform on their mobile devices from anywhere with an internet connection. Applicants can now pay online. Applicants can communicate with their assigned agent and township staff through a direct messaging feature on the Cloud Permit platform. Applicants can upload required documents in an electronic format, which is essentially a paperless process for everyone involved. Applicants could coordinate the completion of any conditions imposed by the township and be informed about when these conditions are fulfilled. And applicants can be kept informed of the status of their application using an application status feature. So what we found so far since we began implementing this in the fall of 2023 is that it's been quite helpful in allowing the application process to be dealt with more efficiently.
And while we have you, can you tell us, a couple people have mentioned the GeoHub, which I also think is a great tool. Can you tell us what's available on the GeoHub and how people can get there?
Absolutely. So Muskoka GeoHub is an online platform administered by the district municipality of Muskoka, and it enables the public to search and visualize GIS data. So what it's most often used for is to confirm zoning of your property, and it can be accessed from, I have the web link here, it's map.muskoka.on.ca. And again, follow that link and you'll find a tab or a zoning layer that'll allow you to search for your property and confirm its zoning. And another interesting layer that I think the public would find helpful is a new planning activity layer that we've partnered and collaborated with the district on, where the public can see in progress and ongoing and completed planning applications in real time using the mapping platform. So yes, it's quite a great platform with a wealth of information.
Thank you. David, this next question's for you. And Stephen touched on this a little bit, but if I'm a neighboring property owner and I have concerns about a development process, and maybe I haven't talked to my neighbor, how can I engage in the planning process, and what kind of feedback is useful as opposed to, noise that you can't really do anything about?
Well, the formal answer is really you can engage formally in a couple ways. You can speak at meetings in person, and we do now have hybrid meetings at the town of Muskoka Lakes, so either online or physically in person. You can make written submissions to the municipality. However, you can also informally reach out to planning staff at any time that you're aware of the application and certainly inquire and gain more information as soon as you become aware of the application. Never hesitate to reach out to staff and gain that information. You can technically also reach out to your local councillors, but I tend, not to overly encourage that. I think, really direct you to the experts that have more information on the application. But nothing does prevent you from reaching out to your councillor. But the reason I wanted to note that is a lot of applications are minor variances or consents, and you cannot reach out to the Committee of Adjustment. A Committee of Adjustment member, as it is a quasi-judicial body, and they're not to have prior information or additional information that other members wouldn't have. I think the question as to what would be helpful information is really a good one. As you noted, I've been involved in many applications, many meetings, and I find it's difficult. I appreciate that, but many times emotions get involved and there's hyperbole, and that sort of thing. And that is not typically overly helpful when it comes to providing comments. I think what I certainly find is best is providing constructive, either criticism or constructive comments. You need to put yourself really in a counselor's shoes or a committee member's shoes. You know, you have a landowner who's pursuing development that's invested in something that, you know, is quite emotionally attached to it. You have neighbors who might be opposed, and then you have counselors stuck in the middle having to make a difficult decision. And you know, that puts them in a really difficult spot. So as opposed to the black and white, just no, you know, we're opposed, those sort of comments, what is really helpful is to come up with suggestions, compromise ideas. What would or what could be done to the development that would make it more palatable or mitigate your concerns? Put ideas or suggestions out there as opposed to, you know, vehemently opposing. The comments about getting into personal attacks on neighbors are definitely never well received. Comments such as, you know, there used to be loons in the bay or deer walk the property, not typically helpful, because again, there might be environmental studies and qualified professionals who have looked at it. It's really, again, providing information that you are familiar with because you're the most familiar with the area, and perhaps counselors or staff may not be, and then constructive comments as to, you know, what is an appropriate development or what changes could be done that would assist in council's decision making. I find those are the most helpful comments.
Thank you. And so just while we're on the subject, what's the role of municipal council in the approval process, and what happens if municipal councils are not deny an application, say when it has been recommended for approval? What happens then?
Well, they certainly, council was not bound or committee by staff's recommendation. Staff only makes recommendations, so councils can certainly choose alternate approaches or decisions. And certainly there's nothing wrong with that per se, but what can happen is should an applicant or an owner appeal said decision, let's say staff recommended favorably of an application and council chose to turn that down, that might be a challenge should it be appealed for the municipality to properly defend that decision at a tribunal. What it essentially forces the municipality to do is look for outside planning council or planning advice who would be aligned or agree with council's decision. A very important thing to note, I don't know if I didn't catch it in Steve's presentation or others' comments, but planners are not advocates. So we cannot argue. We make an opinion, and if council is not, I don't know, member of the community is able to tell us to change that opinion or to take a different position. A lawyer can argue for you and a lawyer advocates, that's for sure, but a planner doesn't. So once the recommendation is there, the municipality council will have to seek another planner to really properly defend that decision of the tribunal.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of the time here, and I'd like to move on now to Stephen Fauner. Before I do that, I just want to, I would like to ask Bryce to comment on the current plan to update the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and what could we see there? What kind of things are being considered there?
Absolutely. The township, as we know, is currently in the stages of updating its comprehensive zoning bylaw. Its early stages, I should say, and this project will be ramping up over the coming months. Much thought and deliberation has been put into the township's new official plan, and the township's comprehensive zoning bylaw is the main mechanism now to implement those policies that we've put all the hard work and energy into. As a result, staff are anticipating a whole host of changes stemming from new policy, including increased minimum lot frontage and lot area requirements to sever land within the waterfront designation, more consistent and less complex, I would say, minimum lot frontage and lot area requirements for the subdivision of rural lands, implementation of site-specific, lake-specific policies for those lakes who have undertaken a lake planning exercise, and which has been included in the township's official plan, freezing a lot creation where it has been determined that the recreational carrying capacity has been exceeded, restrictions on development within identified floodplains. There's a new consideration in the official plan with respect to allowing or permitting a limited recreational use of the first story of a boathouse, and it's yet to be determined what those specific zoning provisions might look like to regulate that use. Considerations will need to be had with respect to habitable buildings and how to better regulate habitable buildings within the township, particularly within the waterfront designation. And last but not least, there's a number of housekeeping changes required to assist with ease and interpretation of existing zoning provisions.
Thanks, Bryce. And I'm imagining there'll be a public input process that goes along with this review, and people can sign up on the Engage Muskoka website once that gets underway. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, that is correct. We're currently in the process of we've put out a request for proposal. Once that is awarded, we'll begin the next steps, and of course there will be a public engagement component and plenty of opportunity for public and stakeholders to become involved.
Thank you. So now I'd like to, our questions are piling up in the Q&A, and I promise you your questions will be answered. If not live at the end of this, then we will either post them on the website or get back to you somehow. But I'd like to turn now to Stephen Fauner, representing planning consultants everywhere. Can you tell us, when should I hire a planning consultant, and what are the benefits, and what should I look for in a planning consultant? How do I go about hiring one?
Well, I think there's a number of instances where you could retain a planner, and some of them you may not necessarily think of. Ones I've been involved in, for example, when somebody's purchasing a property, they may want to contact a planner to find out what can or can't be done on that particular property. I've been involved in a number of instances where it's estate planning, and people are trying to determine what to do with their property. They have a large property and they want to divide it into a number of parcels for children. So that's another time when that could happen. The other is if you're making an application under the Planning Act, planners know the lingo. We certainly can speak to each other, and I think, as hopefully shown in my presentation, the documents can be fairly complicated to make your way through, and a planner can certainly assist with that. The other main one is if you happen to be objecting to a proposal as well, and I think I outlined some of that in my presentation. But hiring a planner, as David had indicated, you get independent planning advice. We are governed by a code of conduct, if you will, through the Ontario Professional Planners Institute. We're not to advocate for people. If you want an advocate, then you hire a lawyer or possibly a real estate agent. But planners do have to provide independent planning advice. And you want to look for ones that have an OPPI or, an RPP, which is Registered Professional Planner, or MCIP, which is member of the Canadian Institute of Planners. You want to have someone who has those designations. And you can find those, OPPI has a directory of planners. So you can look on that directory. I'm one that's on the directory, for example, and I'm sure there are others in Muskoka.
Unmute. We talked a little bit earlier about the focus on environmental policies and how those are evolving. What changes do you see? We talked a little bit about the comprehensive zoning bylaw in the Township of Muskoka Lakes, but what are the sort of overarching changes that you see in the evolution of planning policy in the Muskoka area?
Well, I think there's more emphasis, and always will be, on the environment. There are certainly a push for housing. Housing is not just a GTA issue. There's obviously housing issues up here. And there will be increased densities expected in communities. I'm just hoping that that doesn't become something that happens in the waterfront area, because we don't want to impact densities, which will ultimately impact lakes and lake quality. But I mentioned net gain in my presentation, which is a very important initiative. The other is long-term site monitoring is starting to appear. To throw out another term, integrated watershed management is coming up, and looking at things on a more watershed management basis. We don't have a conservation authority in Muskoka, for example, or Parry Sound per se. So that's something that's also going to come along and become more evident. We've got lots more updated information on the Muskoka River watershed. There was $5 million spent recently on 12 different projects. So there's lots of background material, so that's improving as well. So, and I think there'll always be methods come out regarding lakeshore capacity. Recreational carrying capacity is kind of the buzzword at the moment. It's probably not a perfect solution or a perfect methodology, so I can see that there's going to be maybe some additional thought put on that regarding lakeshore capacity.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Just a reminder to ask your questions through the Q&A rather than raising your hand, because we can't hear you as a participant. Stephen, I think I'm going to turn over now to Hugh, because I want to leave some time for questions from the floor as well. Thanks, Hugh, for joining us. You are a quite well-respected builder in the Muskoka region. What makes a good designer builder, and how should I go about finding one if I want to undertake a major project?
Well, thanks, Debbie, and good evening to everybody and everyone involved in helping put this webinar together. So to answer the question, and it's a bit broken into two parts. I guess we're going to talk about the designer first. I guess that's a little bit loose. I mean, for me as a builder, I look for a few different things in a designer, because I, want to see, really good plans, and that, they fully understand that the building that they're drawing, and they convey that to me. But initially, to find a designer, I feel that, attending the site, I sometimes, you want to know that the architect is familiar with the area. You want to have the architect definitely have come to your site. Sometimes I literally got plans, as a builder, we bid on these things, and I get plans, and sometimes I question whether the architect's ever even seen Muskoka, because the building certainly doesn't suit the lot. So, those are some of the things, as I say. So knowing that the person is experienced in the area, familiar with that type of building that you're looking to do. For myself, what I believe in a builder, again, someone who's been to the site, I mean, that attends the site on a regular basis. Someone who can help educate the client as to the process and what, goes on in that. To me, experience is everything. I've been a builder for almost 35 years, and, every day I learn more and more about construction and how to improve upon that. So I know, a young upcoming builder, you might want to give them a chance, but there's nothing like tried and proven, because if you've been around for a long time, then I think that your reputation, one would have confidence in you, and that's certainly a huge part of it's a big relationship between a client and a builder. There's an awful lot of money involved. It's very emotional, so you should feel confident in your builder. One of the ways to try and find a builder is, I think word of mouth works. It's quite successful. I think that a lot of people have a reference from someone else who's experienced that particular builder. There's things like the Muskoka Builders Association and some associations. That's a little bit broader. That areas. Stephen was even talking about that earlier. Our area is broad. It doesn't just cover the 3 lakes. The Muskoka Builders Association is something that covers, the municipalities as well. But there's not really a group an association or what have you that would focus on the lakes. I think that there's a little bit more of an experience again in a builder for that. So social media as well. You could see, multiple projects. So again, that will help to, maybe see things that you're interested in, but also show again experience. So that's what I think.
Great, thank you. In your experience, what's sort of the biggest mistake people make when they're building a new cottage? And how can you avoid that mistake?
Well, that's definitely an interesting question. So I think that it's important that people understand the size of the building. I think that one of the more common things is, they built the wrong size. I think that it goes both ways as well. You either built it's too big or it's too small. It's sort of like the three bears. It's, you want to make it just right. But one of the things that I want to talk about too is there's a bit of a misconception about square foot costs, and that's all anyone really talks about. And it's not so simple because, for example, if you have a fairly small building and you have 3 kitchens and 5 bathrooms, your cost per square foot is going to go up an awful lot. So I think that people need to understand that, because again, the other way it would be is, I'm going to make all these bedrooms very small because I'm reducing my overall costs, so I must be saving money. And it's not the case, because it's really the number of rooms. You have to write off that kitchen, you have to write off the bathrooms. But if you're really thinking, my bedroom is 10 by 10 and I wish it was 15 by 15, it's still a room, and the actual costs are not going to be that much different. So that's the part of it. And then again, there's just those who just want it to be as absolutely big as possible, and they're, that's a whole other thing. But another discussion, I guess, on that, because that just contributes to overdevelopment. So again, I think you really need to say, what we really do need, and really, try and stick to that.
Great, thank you. What's the best way to work with a builder? How can I most effectively work with my builder? It's a team effort. It's not.
Yes, I mean, it's definitely, communication is key, and the more communication that you have, the better. We recommend a weekly meeting. We call ours an agenda call. It can happen virtually. It can happen on site. We definitely like to see on site more, because it's a little more tangible when you're there. You can understand, if you're seeing it in person as opposed to trying to describe it. But an agenda call, like I said, we do that weekly, and during those calls, we always keep the client informed. So we're talking about choices. We're talking about changes that might occur. We're talking about the budget. We're talking about timeline. How a choice that we're making today, is it going to affect budget and timeline? Is it something that you really need to have, but we might not be able to procure that for 6 months? How is that going to impact? So if you're constantly communicating with your client, then the understanding is there. And again, it's a stressful thing. So relationship is everything. And we want, at the end of the day, to have future references. So a relationship that has a lot of communication usually leads to the best jobs.
Great, thank you very much. And one final question for you, Hugh, before we turn to the questions from the floor. What are the current trends, and what do you see in new building design? And maybe talk for a minute about sustainable building practices, how to make my project last.
Well, definitely you want to look at things for sustainability. I also don't just look at longevity of product, but we also look at things like FSC, responsibly harvested lumber. And FSC is a certified lumber. It's select cut, so it's not clear cut. It's more responsibly, and it's certified. And so you can ask the lumber yard if that what you're purchasing is FSC. We've seen a bit of a change in the last 8 to 10 years. We've seen the glass box, that we'll call it, that's certainly been around, but we're seeing that trend is coming to an end, and that we're sort of trending towards more transitional, which still will take some of those more modern designs and innovative ideas, but still lean back towards more traditional. So we're starting to see that a lot more now.
Great, thank you. I'm now going to just we've got some questions from the floor. I don't think we're going to get through all of them, but maybe we can just comment on a few. I'm going to direct this first question to David Pink. It has to do with site alteration. And the question is, can you comment on significant site alteration and what the bar is for significant site alteration? David, I wonder if you could address that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Stephen Fauner wishes to comment. I think he may have referred to that. And all I can say is the township site alteration bylaw, I don't think distinguishes between significant or non-significant. It's really any alteration to grade, whether that's blasting, soil removal, or soil addition, would be considered site alteration, and that's regulated in certain areas through that bylaw. I'm not sure if Stephen wishes to expand on
Stephen, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just to say that it's really difficult to define what significant is. You could do it in cubic yards of material, for example, but a lot of it depends on the context of the site. If that site alteration is taking place, as an example, 200 feet back from the lake, well, it would have less impact than if it was 50 feet from the lake. So I think the context is important. It's very difficult to determine what that is. I think if there's a concern with site alteration on a neighboring property, then that's when you may wish to phone the municipality and they'll come out and make their determination.
Thank you. Here's another question, and perhaps this also is appropriate for either Taylor or maybe Taylor could address this, as to do with accessory buildings. Is there any circumstance where an accessory building can be built on a vacant lot ahead of the main structure? So I guess a boathouse or a garage. Can you comment on that? And maybe the rules are different in Seguin than they are in Muskoka Lake. So David, if you want to chime in, please do so.
Yeah, they're different everywhere, so it depends on the municipality. We do allow docks to be built in advance of other structures, which makes sense because if you have an island access or a water access only property, you need a dock to develop the rest of your property. What we typically see though is that we require a main building to be built first. Rationale being we don't want garages being put up on a vacant property and no main use occurring at any point in time. So quite often people pay for the permits and do the plans for everything at the same time, and you see both get constructed at the same time because they want the garage to be used for storage during the construction of their building.
Okay, thank you. David, did you want to comment on that question as well? I don't know if the rules are different in Muskoka Lakes.
Yes, I think our rules are similar when we don't permit accessory structures prior to other than a small shed or a dock on a lot accessible by water. So if you have an island property, you are permitted a dock, obviously, to access for construction.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid that's probably all the time we have for this evening. Before we close out, a couple of notes. There are some questions outstanding in the chat. Some of them are from anonymous sources, so we won't be able to answer those questions directly to the person. But what we will do is provide some written answers for folks and post them on our website along with the recording of this webinar. I'd like to remind folks too that there'll be a closing poll at the end of this. It just asks for your feedback on, did you find this useful, and what would you like to see in future webinars? That's really all the time we have for today. I'd really like to thank all of our guests for freely giving of their time and expertise to join us tonight. This evening has been brought to you by the Muskoka Lakes Association. We're the oldest lake association in Canada, serving the waterfront landowners since 1894. And if you're not currently a member of the Muskoka Lakes Association, I'd just like to ask, why not? You get great products like this. You can find more information on our website. And again, we will be posting the recording of this website, of this webinar on our website. So please complete our last three polling questions and tell us how you felt about this. And with that, I will close the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you learned something tonight.